Manchester by the Sea. Manchester by the Sea is a masterfully crafted misdirect. Judging from the trailers, or even from the first act of the movie, it clearly presents itself a certain way and establishes certain audience expectations. Namely, that it will be an emotionally taxing, grief-stricken journey that ultimately proves to be uplifting-ish, if not a little bittersweet. And while those expectations are certainly met, and the movie takes you to the emotional places you think it will take you, the journey it takes getting there is not what you're expecting. Lee Chandler, played by Casey Affleck, is a custodian/handyman living a secluded life in Boston. One day he gets a call that his brother Joe, played by Kyle Chandler in flashbacks, has died, and Lee must return home to the eponymous Manchester by the Sea to see to Joe's funeral arrangements. While there, Lee learns that he's been named the guardian of his now fatherless nephew, Patrick, played by Lucas Hedges, which he believes he's ill-suited for.
Well, you know, he can always stay with us if he wants to come up weekends.
Do you want to be his guardian?
Well,
he doesn't want to be my guardian, for Christ's sake. He's got
We're trying to lose some kids at this point.
No, we're trying to work out the logistics, so I didn't know.
Pretty good, but
Jesus Christ, you want to stop?
We've always got a sofa for him anytime he wants.
George.
You know that, right?
That's all right. I know
He's
that.
welcome anytime.
The arrangement also presents the logistical problem of either uprooting Patrick's life and moving him to Boston, or uprooting Lee's life with a permanent return to Manchester, where he's forced to confront his troubled past. His troubled past is presented in a series of flashbacks to when Joe was still alive and Lee was still married to his ex-wife Randy, played by Michelle Williams. In general, I think flashbacks are both overused and often misused, and they're surprisingly hard to get right. If you don't believe me, read a handful of amateur screenplays sometime. And so when flashbacks are so seamlessly woven into a narrative like these are, and when they are substantive and illuminating as these are, it's all the more impressive and remarkable. The flashbacks are presented as answers to narrative questions raised in the main storyline. Sometimes it's an immediate answer to an immediate question, like when it flashes back to tell us Joe had a rare heart condition, making his death not quite as sudden as we may have initially assumed. Sometimes that means more drawn-out answers to more nuanced questions, like how Lee went from a happily married life in Manchester to a disgruntled, isolated life in a one-room basement apartment in Boston. So while the story is centered around the fallout of a family tragedy, it's not really the focus you might expect. Joe's death is obviously the impetus for the story, but surprisingly, it's not much more than the impetus. Minus one or two scenes, Patrick actually seems pretty at peace with his father's passing, and he doesn't really need much consolation. Lee doesn't even seem all that concerned with how Patrick would fare with Lee as his guardian. Patrick's already 16 and reasonably self-sufficient. He doesn't need Lee to raise him or anything like that. Mostly just drive him to his girlfriend's houses.
Hey, Uncle Lee. Is it okay if Sylvie sleeps over? Dad always let her.
What are you asking me for?
No reason. Thanks.
So the places where you expect the most conflict and drama are fairly dramaless. The drama is instead found in Lee's homecoming and his inexplicable resistance to returning to Manchester, and eventually in his very explicable resistance to the same.
All my friends are here. I got 2 girlfriends, and I'm in a band. You're a janitor in Quincy. What the hell do you care where you live?
Despite how it presents itself, it's less a movie about dealing with the loss of a brother and father, and more about coming home, confronting your past, and making peace with who you were and what you've done. It's a movie about forgiveness, self or otherwise. And if that sounds more tame than dealing with concrete loss, like the death of a brother or father, I promise you that it's not. You go in expecting one kind of gut punch, and then the second you exhale with relief, the movie hits you with a different, much worse gut punch. There's a scene between Lee and his ex-wife towards the end that I've been referring to as the scene, because it's featured heavily in the marketing, because it's one of only like 4 scenes that Michelle Williams appears in, and yet it got her 4th Oscar nomination, and because it's the clearest manifestation of this forgiveness theme.
You could see him if you want.
Could we ever have lunch?
You mean us? You and me?
Yeah.
There's a distinction I've made before between earned emotional moments and unearned emotional moments, and the scene is a textbook example of the former. Writer-director Kenneth Lonergan puts in work to get us here, and even if you hate the rest of the movie, not sure how you could, the scene itself is worth the price of admission. In other years, I might call it the most moving scene of the year, but Moonlight came out this year. And even beyond that one scene, despite how emotionally challenging most of the movie is, it crucially never feels cheap, manipulative, or cloying. Always grounded, natural, and complex. In addition to the well-deserved praise heaped onto Michelle Williams, limited screen time aside, there have been Oscar whispers for Casey Affleck ever since the movie premiered at Sundance 13 months ago. And all this time later, he remains locked in a two-horse race with Denzel Washington for Best Actor, which I think he'll win. And yeah, while Affleck's nomination has brought up some important discussions about the separation between art and artist, it's a really great performance. From the way his early scenes hint at buried rage and repressed heartbreak, to the way that these things are slowly brought to the surface, fighting through his rough exterior, to the way that he ultimately succumbs to emotional vulnerability. Lucas Hedges does really well with what he's given, but as I kind of alluded, his performance is less demanding just by the nature of his character. This actually might be for the best, because if Patty had been emotionally traumatized and actually needed Lee's care and support, then the overlaps with Good Will Hunting might have become excessive. And while I know that Matt Damon's producer role, the Massachusetts setting, and the presence of an Affleck at center stage all invite comparisons to Good Will Hunting, to say nothing of Lucas Hedges' creepily close resemblance to a young Matt Damon, it really does feel like a spiritual sequel in a lot of ways. Both movies center around characters keeping themselves hidden from the world to protect themselves from heartbreak, by working as a janitor in Boston, no less. Both movies include characters projecting a rough exterior to mask immense pain, unsuccessfully in the end. Both movies' central relationship is an older mentor and a younger mentee trying to get used to each other. Throw out the Will is a genius for some reason plotline and the audience-friendly love story, and Manchester by the Sea is basically Good Will Hunting from the perspective of Robin Williams' character. A man trying to tend to the well-being of his young associate while also being crippled by his inability to move on from a past marriage. Though Lee Chandler and Sean Maguire can't move on from their past marriages for very different reasons.
And I don't see it as a film about grief. I see it as a film about love and about people trying to help each other and take care of each other as much as it's a film about grief. It is about grief, obviously, but it's really about someone who's trying to do right by his family, even though he's ready to quit.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so I won't try. Manchester by the Sea is a devastating and marvelously constructed screenplay, brilliantly acted and tenderly directed. Everyone brings their A game, and all the pieces fit together beautifully for a stellar adult drama with plenty of heart. Just bring the tissues.
I'm not gonna bother you. I'm gonna just sit here until you calm down.
All right, I'm calmer now. Would you please just go away?
No.